Undercover owner saw chef frying bacon at 5 a.m., then caught a secret side hustle scheme. The alarm screamed at 4:30 a.m., and Marcus Chin slapped it silent with the practiced irritation of a man who hadn't slept well in months. Outside his bedroom window, Chicago was still dark, the kind of deep winter darkness that made you question every life choice that led to leaving a warm bed. But Marcus had questions that couldn't wait for sunrise. 3 months ago, his restaurant, the Ember and Oak, had started bleeding money. Not the dramatic kind of loss that signals disaster, but the slow, steady drip that was somehow worse. Inventory numbers didn't match sales. Utility bills spiked without explanation. His manager, Patricia, swore everything was fine, but the spreadsheets told a different story. So Marcus did what any desperate restaurant owner would do. He went undercover in his own business. Nobody at the Ember and Oak knew what he looked like. He'd inherited the place from his uncle 2 years ago and ran it entirely remotely from San Francisco, trusting Patricia to handle operations. It was supposed to be a passive investment, a safety net. Instead, it had become a puzzle that cost him sleep and savings. Now, sliding into worn jeans and a cheap jacket from Goodwill, Marcus Chin was about to become Mark, a new prep cook desperate for work. The bus ride to the restaurant took 40 minutes, giving Marcus time to rehearse his backstory. Just out of county lockup, needed cash work, no questions asked. Patricia had hired him over the phone yesterday with barely an interview. Apparently, the kitchen was short-staffed. Red flag number 1. He arrived at 4:55 a.m. to find the back entrance already propped open with a cinder block. The kitchen was supposed to be empty until 6 a.m. That's what the schedule said. That's what he paid people for. Marcus pushed the door open slowly, and that's when he smelled it. Bacon. Not just any bacon, the thick-cut, applewood smoked stuff he special ordered from a supplier in Wisconsin. The expensive kind that was supposed to be rationed carefully for the dinner service. Someone was cooking his premium bacon at 5 in the morning, and the restaurant didn't even serve breakfast. Marcus slipped inside, keeping his footsteps light. The kitchen was dimly lit, just the overhead lights above the main cooking line. Pans clanged softly, and he heard the unmistakable sizzle of fat hitting a hot griddle. He crept past the walk-in freezer, past the dry storage, until he could peer around the corner into the main kitchen. There, working with the focused intensity of a surgeon, was the head chef. Marcus recognized him from the staff photos Patricia had sent. James Morrison, 34, been with the restaurant for 8 months. Excellent reviews on his cooking, 0 complaints about his character. Patricia had called him the backbone of our kitchen. Right now, that backbone was hunched over 3 griddles simultaneously, cooking what looked like 24 portions of bacon, scrambled eggs, and hash browns. Marcus's mind raced. A theft operation? Was James stealing food to sell on the side? But that didn't make sense. He was using the restaurant's equipment, on the restaurant's property. Thieves didn't usually commit crimes in the place they were stealing from. James moved with practiced efficiency, plating food into plain white takeout containers, not the branded ones the Ember and Oak used for delivery. He stacked them carefully in 2 large insulated bags, the kind food delivery drivers used. Then James checked his watch, wiped down the griddles with almost obsessive care, and sprayed them with degreaser. He was cleaning up the evidence. Marcus pressed himself against the wall as James grabbed the bags and headed for the back door. The chef paused just once, glancing around the kitchen with an expression Marcus couldn't quite read. Guilt? Fear? Determination? Then he was gone, the back door clicking shut behind him. Marcus stood frozen for a moment, processing what he'd just witnessed. The smart move was to confront James immediately, fire him, maybe call the police. But something held him back: the meticulous cleanup, the careful portioning, the fact that James had looked less like a thief and more like a man on a mission. He pulled out his phone and did the math. 24 portions, maybe $150 worth of food at cost. If James was doing this regularly, that explains some of the inventory discrepancies, but not all of them. And it didn't explain the utility spikes or the odd cash deposits Patricia had mentioned in passing, small amounts, always anonymous, always after closing. Marcus made a decision that would have horrified his business school professors. Instead of confronting James, he was going to follow him. He slipped out the back door just in time to see James's beat-up Honda Civic pulling out of the parking lot. Marcus ran to his rental car, thankfully parked a block away, and followed at a distance. Chicago was waking up slowly. A few early buses rumbled past, and the occasional taxi cruised for fares. James drove carefully, obeying every speed limit, until he pulled into a 24-hour gas station on West Division Street. Marcus parked across the street and watched. A taxi pulled up next to James's car, not to refuel, but to meet. The driver, a tired-looking woman in her 50s, got out. James handed her 2 containers. She tried to give him money, but James shook his head. She pressed it into his hand anyway. They talked for maybe 30 seconds, then she got back in her taxi, and James drove off. Marcus's hands tightened on the steering wheel. This wasn't a simple theft. This was organized. Deliberate. He followed James to 4 more stops over the next hour, Northwestern Memorial Hospital's employee entrance, where a nurse in scrubs met him, a sanitation depot, where 2 garbage collectors were just starting their shift, a bus terminal, where James handed food to a security guard, and finally, a small park where 3 homeless men sat on a bench, clearly expecting him. At each stop, the same ritual. James handed over food, people tried to pay him, he reluctantly accepted what looked like just a few dollars per container. By 6:30 a.m., the insulated bags were empty, and James was driving back to the Ember and Oak. Marcus sat in his car, watching the sunrise paint the Chicago skyline in shades of orange and gold, and realized he had no idea what he'd just witnessed. Was this charity? A side business? Some kind of elaborate scam he didn't understand yet? One thing was certain, James Morrison was running a secret operation out of the Ember and Oak, and Marcus needed to know why. Because the man he just followed didn't look like a criminal. He looked like someone who couldn't afford to get caught. Marcus showed up for his official first shift at 9 a.m., his mind still churning through what he'd witnessed at dawn. Patricia greeted him with a clipboard and a harried smile. She was exactly as his uncle had described her, efficient but perpetually overwhelmed. "Mark, right? Thank God you're here. James will train you on prep work." James Morrison appeared from the walk-in cooler, carrying a box of vegetables. Up close, he looked different than he had in the shadowy pre-dawn kitchen. Younger, maybe? Tired, definitely. But his handshake was firm, and his eyes were kind. "Ever worked a kitchen before?" James asked. Marcus, now Mark, shrugged. "Here and there. Nothing fancy." "Good. Fancy gets you killed during dinner rush. I need reliable." James set him up at a prep station with a mountain of onions. "Dice these. 1/4-inch cubes. We go through about 40 pounds a night." For the next 8 hours, Marcus kept his head down and his eyes open. He watched James run the kitchen with quiet authority, never yelling like the stereotyped TV chefs, but commanding respect through sheer competence. The other cooks moved around him like planets orbiting a sun. But Marcus also noticed the small things. How James portioned ingredients with unusual precision, setting aside specific amounts in the walk-in. How he stayed an hour after closing, claiming he wanted to prep for tomorrow. How he carefully avoided waste, saving vegetable scraps that most kitchens would trash. At 11 p.m., Marcus clocked out with the other prep cooks, said his goodnights, and walked to his car. Then he waited. Sure enough, at midnight, James's Civic pulled out of the parking lot. Marcus followed him through empty Chicago streets, keeping 2 cars back. This time, James didn't stop at gas stations or hospitals. He drove straight to the south side, to a neighborhood where streetlights flickered and chain-link fences guarded empty lots. James parked outside a building with no sign, just an address, 4247 South Ashland. Lights spilled from the windows, and Marcus could see movement inside. Lots of people, even at this hour. James grabbed a single insulated bag from his trunk, smaller than the morning's haul, and went inside. Marcus waited 5 minutes, then followed. The building turned out to be a community center, and inside, it was controlled chaos. Folding tables lined the walls, covered with everything from toiletries to donated clothes. A makeshift medical station occupied one corner, staffed by a volunteer who looked like a retired nurse. And in the center, people lined up at a serving window where a woman in a hairnet was ladling soup. James stood in the kitchen area, talking with an older black man in a minister's collar. "Third time this week, James. You can't keep doing this," the minister was saying, though his tone was grateful, not angry. "Pastor Williams, you've got 60 people here tonight. The city meal program only covers 40 portions. What am I supposed to do, let them go hungry? You're supposed to let me worry about it. This isn't your burden." James started unpacking his containers. Tonight it was sandwiches, simple but substantial. "My kitchen, my choice how I use it." Marcus felt something twist in his chest. This wasn't a side hustle. This wasn't theft for profit. This was a man feeding people who had nothing. He backed out before James could spot him, but his mind was racing. The early morning deliveries, the night workers, the homeless men in the park. James wasn't selling food. He was giving it away to the people who fell through society's cracks. The ones who worked graveyard shifts and couldn't afford $15 meals. The ones who slept on benches and survived on whatever charity they could find. And he was using Marcus's restaurant to do it. Marcus sat in his car, watching James emerge 40 minutes later, the insulated bag empty. The chef looked exhausted, shadows under his eyes deep enough to swim in. He leaned against his car for a moment, just breathing, before driving away. Marcus didn't follow this time. He drove back to his hotel room and opened his laptop, pulling up the restaurant's records with fresh eyes. The anonymous cash deposits Patricia had mentioned, they matched James's schedule. Small amounts, $20 here, $40 there, deposited into the restaurant's account every few days. Not enough to cover the food costs, but enough to prove James wasn't just stealing. He was paying what he could. The utility spikes made sense now too. Extra hours of cooking meant extra gas, extra electricity. James Morrison was running an unauthorized charitable operation out of the Ember and Oak, trying to cover his tracks with pocket change, and putting the entire restaurant at risk. And Marcus had absolutely no idea what to do about it. Because firing James meant 60 hungry people at Pastor Williams's shelter would go to bed with empty stomachs tomorrow night. It meant taxi drivers and nurses and sanitation workers would lose their one affordable meal. But keeping James meant legal liability, health code violations, and insurance nightmares that could shut down the restaurant permanently. Marcus closed his laptop and stared at the ceiling until dawn crept through the curtains. Some problems, he was learning, didn't have easy answers. Marcus arrived at the Ember and Oak at 7 a.m. the next morning, 2 hours before his shift. He told Patricia he wanted to learn the inventory system, eager new employee, trying to understand the business. She handed him the keys to the supply room without a second thought. "Knock yourself out. Just don't move anything around. James has his own system." Of course he does, Marcus thought. The supply room was pristine, organized with the kind of precision that spoke of military training or culinary school discipline. Dry goods alphabetized on the left, canned items by category on the right, spices in a custom rack that probably cost more than Marcus's first car. But it was the clipboard hanging by the door that made Marcus's stomach drop. James kept a secondary inventory log, handwritten, meticulous, separated into 2 columns. One labeled ED end of day, the other, personal use. Every item James took for his secret operation was documented: 3 pounds of bacon, 2 dozen eggs, 4 pounds of potatoes. Next to each entry was a dollar amount and a date. Marcus did the math. Over the past month, James had borrowed approximately $1,200 worth of ingredients. He cross-referenced it with the anonymous cash deposits in the restaurant's bank account, $340 total over the same period. James wasn't even covering a third of the cost. Marcus pulled out his phone and photographed everything, then moved to the walk-in cooler. There, on the bottom shelf, hidden behind industrial-sized containers of mayonnaise, he found them, the plain white takeout containers, purchased separately from the restaurant's branded packaging. A box of 500, maybe 200 already used. This was premeditated. Organized. James had been planning this operation for months, maybe since he started working here. Marcus's business instincts screamed at him. This was theft, pure and simple. Intent didn't matter. The law didn't care if you stole food to feed hungry people or to sell on the black market. Stolen was stolen. But something else nagged at him. He returned to the supply room and looked closer at James's log. The personal use entries started 8 months ago, right when James was hired. But they weren't consistent. For the first 2 months, there was nothing. Then, small amounts in month 3. By month 6, the operation had reached its current scale. What changed? Marcus spent the rest of the morning digging through the restaurant's paperwork, the files Patricia kept in the cramped back office. Employee records, health inspections, vendor invoices. He was looking for something, though he wasn't sure what. Then he found James's employment application. Previous employer, Greystone Culinary Institute. That explained the precision and discipline. Before that, River North Bistro sous chef. Before that, Marine Corps, for years, honorable discharge. But it was the emergency contact section that made Marcus pause. Emergency contact, none listed. No family. No friends. Just a single phone number labeled. Pastor Williams, South Side Community Outreach. The same Pastor Williams from the shelter last night. Marcus pulled out his laptop and did something he probably shouldn't have. He searched for James Morrison's public records. A Chicago Tribune article from 3 years ago appeared, a small human interest piece about veterans struggling with homelessness. The photos showed a younger James, thinner, harder-looking, standing outside a VA clinic. The caption read, James Morrison, 31, veteran and former chef, receives services at the South Side Community Outreach Center. Without places like this, he says, I wouldn't have survived my first winter back. Marcus sat back in the creaky office chair, the pieces clicking together. James had been homeless. Pastor Williams's shelter had helped him. Now James was paying it forward, feeding the same kind of night shift workers and forgotten people who had once been his only community. It wasn't about profit. It wasn't even about charity, exactly. It was about survival, not James's survival anymore, but the survival of people still living the life he'd escaped. Marcus closed the laptop and rubbed his eyes. The numbers didn't lie. James was costing the restaurant money, violating health codes, creating massive liability exposure. If a health inspector showed up during one of those 5 a.m. cooking sessions, the Ember and Oak would be shut down immediately. If someone got food poisoning from an unsanctioned meal, the lawsuits would bury them. Every rational business decision pointed to one conclusion: fire James Morrison, cut the losses, and move on. But Marcus kept seeing that photograph, James, 3 years younger, eyes hollow with hunger and hopelessness, standing outside a shelter that had saved his life. He pulled out the anonymous deposit records again. $340. James was barely scraping by on a line cook's salary, probably living in some tiny apartment, and he was still trying to pay back the restaurant for food he was giving away. The door opened and Patricia stuck her head in. Mark? Your shift started 10 minutes ago. James is looking for you. Sorry, got lost in the paperwork, Marcus said, forcing a smile. As he headed to the kitchen, he made a decision. He needed more information before he acted. He needed to understand the full scope of what James was doing and, more importantly, why he was willing to risk everything for it. Because the numbers told him one story. But Marcus was beginning to suspect there was another story underneath, one that spreadsheets couldn't capture. Marcus's third day undercover started normally enough, chopping vegetables, cleaning prep stations, learning the rhythm of a professional kitchen. But at 2 p.m., James did something unexpected. Mark, you're off at 3 today, right? James asked, untying his apron. Yeah, why? I'm heading out early. Personal errand. Can you cover the potato station until dinner prep starts at 4? Marcus nodded, watching James leave through the back door with unusual urgency. He wasn't carrying the insulated bags, wasn't sneaking food. Whatever this errand was, it wasn't part of the secret operation. Which meant Marcus needed to know what it was. He told Patricia he felt sick, food poisoning, maybe something he ate for breakfast, and clocked out 20 minutes later. By the time he reached the parking lot, James's Civic was already gone, but Marcus had a hunch. He drove to the South Side Community Outreach Center. James's car was parked outside, but this time the building looked different in daylight. The paint was peeling, the windows were barred, and a hand-painted sign read, "Hot meals served 6 to 8 p.m. daily. All welcome." Marcus parked down the block and waited. 15 minutes passed. Then 30. Finally, James emerged, but he wasn't alone. Pastor Williams walked beside him, hand on James's shoulder, talking intensely. They stopped on the front steps, and Marcus rolled down his window just enough to catch fragments of the conversation. "Can't keep carrying this weight, son," Pastor Williams was saying. "You've got your own life to build." "What life?" James's voice was sharp, bitter in a way Marcus hadn't heard before. "I work 70 hours a week to afford a studio apartment and ramen noodles. At least this way, something I do matters. You matter, James. Not just what you do for others." James shook his head. "You remember what it was like for me, Pastor. December 3 years ago. I was sleeping in my car, hadn't eaten in 2 days. I showed up here because I heard you served hot meals, and you know what you gave me?" "I remember. Split pea soup and cornbread." "That's it. But it was warm, and it was free, and you didn't ask me why I was there or what I'd done to deserve it. You just fed me." James's voice cracked slightly. "That meal saved my life. Literally. I was planning to drive my car into the lake that night." Marcus felt something cold settle in his stomach. "So yeah," James continued, "I'm going to keep doing this. Because somewhere out there is another version of me. Maybe it's that nurse working double shifts at Northwestern. Maybe it's that cabbie who sleeps 4 hours a night. Maybe it's those guys still living in their cars. And if I can give them one warm meal, one moment where they're not forgotten, then all the risk is worth it." Pastor Williams sighed. "And when you get caught? When you lose your job? Who does that help? I'll figure it out. James, I appreciate everything, Pastor. But I know what I'm doing." They hugged briefly, and James walked to his car. Pastor Williams stood on the steps, watching him go with an expression of profound sadness. Marcus waited until James drove away, then got out of his car and approached the shelter. Pastor Williams was still standing there, looking down the street. "Excuse me," Marcus said. "Are you Pastor Williams?" The older man turned, wariness in his eyes. "I am. You need a meal? We don't serve until 6, but I can make an exception if—" "No, Marcus hesitated. "I work with James Morrison. At the Ember and Oak." Pastor Williams's expression shifted immediately, guarded, protective. "What about him?" "I know what he's doing. The early morning cooking, the deliveries, the meals he brings here. Then you know he's risking everything to help people who have nothing. I also know he's breaking about a dozen health codes and creating massive legal liability." Marcus saw the pastor's face harden. "But I'm not here to stop him. I'm here to understand why he can't stop himself." Pastor Williams studied him for a long moment, then gestured to the steps. They sat. 3 years ago, James came to us broken," the pastor began. "Not just homeless, destroyed. The military had trained him to be a chef, gave him skills and discipline. But when he came back, he had PTSD they wouldn't properly treat, and no support system. Lost his job at a fancy restaurant because he had a panic attack during service. Lost his apartment. Lost everything. And you helped him. We gave him meals and a safe place to sleep. But more than that, we gave him community. People who understood what it meant to be invisible. Pastor Williams paused. James clawed his way back, got treatment, found work, started over. But he never forgot what it felt like to be that desperate. And now he sees people in the same situation everywhere he looks. So he feeds them. He saves them. Pastor Williams corrected. The same way we saved him. But I'm terrified because I know how fragile his recovery still is. One mistake, one disaster, and he could spiral again. Marcus watched a group of people gathering near the shelter entrance, checking their watches. An hour and a half until dinner service, but they were already waiting. How many people depend on this place? Marcus asked. On average? 80 to 100 a day. But the city only funds 40 meals. Pastor Williams's voice dropped. James fills the gap. Has been for 6 months. Without him, I'd have to turn away 60 hungry people every night. Marcus stood up, his mind racing with calculations he couldn't quite complete. Legal risk versus human need, business sense versus moral obligation. Thank you for your time, Pastor. Are you going to fire him? Marcus looked at the people waiting by the door. Tired faces, worn clothes, the invisible people James was risking everything to feed. I don't know, he admitted. But as he walked back to his car, he realized something had shifted. This wasn't just about numbers anymore. This was about what kind of person Marcus wanted to be. Marcus woke up at 4 a.m. on his 4th day, not because he set an alarm, but because he couldn't sleep. His mind kept replaying Pastor Williams's words. Without him, I'd have to turn away 60 hungry people every night. He decided to observe James's operation one more time before making any decisions. He drove to the Ember and Oak in darkness, parking across the street with a clear view of the back entrance. At 4:47 a.m., James's Civic pulled into the lot. Marcus watched him unlock the back door, flip on the kitchen lights, and begin his ritual. Even from outside, Marcus could track the routine by now. First the griddles heating up, then the bacon, then the eggs. James moved like clockwork, efficient and focused. Marcus checked his phone. 45 minutes until the morning delivery run. 90 minutes until the day crew arrived. Then he saw the white SUV. It pulled into the parking lot slowly, deliberately. Official looking. The driver's side door opened, and a woman in a dark jacket stepped out, clipboard in hand. Her partner emerged from the passenger side, both of them wearing badges on lanyards. Marcus's blood turned to ice. Chicago Department of Public Health, health inspectors. They were heading straight for the back entrance, the one James had left propped open with the cinder block. Marcus's hand was on his car door before he thought it through. He couldn't let them catch James red-handed. Not like this. Not before Marcus had figured out what to do. He sprinted across the street and burst through the back door just seconds before the inspectors. James spun around from the griddle, spatula in hand, eyes wide with shock. Health inspectors, Marcus hissed. Right behind me. 30 seconds. To James's credit, he didn't freeze. Military training kicked in immediately. He killed the burners, grabbed the takeout containers, already half filled with food, and shoved them into the insulated bags. Marcus helped without thinking, snatching up the plain white containers from the counter and throwing them into the dry storage closet. The bacon, James started. Leave it. You're prepping for a special breakfast meeting. Corporate clients, Marcus was making it up as he went. Act natural. They heard voices outside the door. James dumped the insulated bags behind a stack of milk crates in the walk-in cooler, then returned to the stove. He cracked fresh eggs into a pan with forced casualness, just as the inspectors walked in. Morning, the female inspector said, flashing her badge. Routine inspection. Didn't expect anyone here this early. Just getting a head start, James replied, voice steady. Marcus was impressed, not a hint of panic. We've got a private breakfast event later. Clients paying premium for fresh-made everything. The inspector nodded, making notes. Name? James Morrison. Head chef. And you are? She turned to Marcus. Mark. Prep cook. Chef asked me to come in early to help. The inspectors moved through the kitchen with practiced efficiency, checking temperatures, examining storage areas, inspecting the cleanliness of surfaces. Marcus's heart hammered as the female inspector approached the walk-in cooler. She opened the door. Marcus held his breath. The insulated bags were visible if you looked carefully, hidden poorly behind the milk crates. One curious glance and this whole thing would explode. But the inspector was focused on her thermometer, checking the ambient temperature, scanning the shelves for expired products. She made a note, nodded with satisfaction, and moved on. 45 minutes later, they were done. Everything looks good, the lead inspector said. Clean operation. We'll send the full report within a week, but I don't see any violations. The moment the door closed behind them, James leaned against the prep counter, breathing hard. His hands were shaking. That was close, Marcus said quietly. James looked at him, really looked at him, for the first time. Why did you help me? I don't know, Marcus admitted. Instinct. You know what I'm doing. It wasn't a question. Marcus nodded. James ran a hand through his hair. How long have you known? Since day one. I followed you. Then why haven't you turned me in? Marcus thought about Pastor Williams, about the people waiting outside the shelter, about the nurse and the taxi driver and the sanitation workers. About James's hollow eyes and that newspaper photo from 3 years ago. Because I'm trying to figure out if you're incredibly stupid or incredibly brave, Marcus said. And I haven't decided yet. James laughed, a short, bitter sound. Can it be both? What happens when you actually get caught? When I'm not here to run interference? Then I lose my job and find another way. James started retrieving the insulated bags from the cooler. But until then, people eat. That's all that matters. Is it? Because from where I'm standing, you almost destroyed this entire restaurant in the last hour. If those inspectors had found the bags, the Ember and Oak would have been shut down. Everyone who works here, Patricia, the line cooks, the servers, all unemployed. How many people does that help? James stopped moving. The words had hit their mark. I'm careful, he said, but his voice lacked conviction. Careful isn't good enough. You got lucky today. What about tomorrow? Next week? Marcus stepped closer. I've seen your operation, James. I know you're trying to do something good. But good intentions don't protect you from the consequences. James looked down at the bags in his hands, filled with food that was supposed to feed people who needed it. For the first time since Marcus had met him, the chef looked lost. What am I supposed to do? James asked quietly. Just stop. Let them starve? I don't know, Marcus said honestly. But this can't continue the way it is. James nodded slowly, then checked his watch. I have deliveries to make. I know. Are you going to stop me? Marcus thought about it, really thought about it. He could end this right now, report everything to Patricia, fire James, and solve all the restaurant's problems in one move. Instead, he said, not today. James studied him for a long moment, then walked out with the bags. Marcus stood alone in the kitchen, surrounded by the smell of bacon and his own uncertainty, and realized he was in deeper than he'd planned. Because helping James dodge those inspectors meant Marcus wasn't just an observer anymore. He was an accomplice. Marcus didn't go home after his shift ended. He stayed in his car across the street, watching the restaurant through the dinner rush, the blur of servers, the glow of the dining room, the customers who had no idea their meals were funding something much bigger. At 11:30 p.m., the last server left. Patricia locked the front door and drove away. The kitchen lights stayed on. Marcus knew James would be inside, doing his nightly routine, cleaning, prepping, and stealing food to feed the forgotten. This time, Marcus wasn't going to watch from the shadows. He used his owner's keys, the ones Patricia didn't know existed, and walked in through the front entrance. The dining room was dark and quiet, chairs upturned on tables, the smell of cleaning solution lingering in the air. Through the kitchen door window, he could see James working alone, portioning rice and beans into containers with mechanical precision. Marcus pushed through the door. James looked up, startled but not surprised. Back again, Mark? Or should I call you something else? The question hung in the air like a knife. Marcus felt his cover shatter. What gave me away? The way you helped me this morning. Nobody thinks that fast unless they've got something to lose. James set down his ladle. Also, you're terrible at chopping onions for someone who claims to have kitchen experience. And you asked too many questions about inventory. Fair enough. James crossed his arms. So who are you really? Corporate spy? Health department plant? Neither. Marcus took a breath. I'm Marcus Chin. I own this restaurant. The color drained from James's face. For a moment, either of them moved. You're the owner, James said slowly. Chen's nephew. The one who runs everything from California. San Francisco. And I stopped running things remotely when the numbers stopped making sense. Marcus pulled out a chair and sat down in the dark dining room. I came here to find out who was bleeding my investment dry. And instead you found me. James's voice was flat, defeated. Feeding homeless people with your expensive bacon. Among other things. James nodded, then started untying his apron. I'll clean out my locker. You want me gone tonight or should I finish the week? Sit down, James. Why? So you can lecture me about theft and liability before you fire me? Sit down, Marcus repeated, harder this time. James sat, jaw tight, waiting for the axe to fall. Marcus leaned forward. I've spent 4 days watching you. I followed you on your deliveries. I saw you at the shelter. I talked to Pastor Williams. I know about the newspaper article, about you being homeless, about why you're doing this. Then you know I can't stop. I know you're going to destroy yourself trying. Marcus pulled out his phone and showed James the photographs, the inventory logs, the anonymous deposits, the spreadsheets showing 8 months of systematic food diversion. You've taken roughly $1,200 worth of ingredients this month alone. You've paid back $340. The math doesn't work, James. It never will. I pay what I can. It's not about the money. Marcus's voice echoed in the empty dining room. He forced himself to lower it. It's about what happens when the next health inspector isn't satisfied with checking temperatures. It's about what happens when someone gets food poisoning from an unlicensed meal. It's about the fact that you're running an unsanctioned food operation out of my restaurant, and when, not if, when, it gets discovered, we both lose everything. James looked down at his hands. I know the risks. Do you? Because I don't think you do. Marcus stood up and started pacing. If this restaurant gets shut down, 60 people lose their jobs. Patricia loses the career she's built here. And you? You don't just lose your job, you lose your culinary license. Your ability to work in any legitimate kitchen again. All because you're trying to save people the same way Pastor Williams saved you. They deserve to be saved, James said quietly. I'm not arguing that. What I'm arguing is the method. Marcus stopped pacing and looked directly at James. You're not wrong for wanting to help. You're wrong for thinking you have to do it alone, in secret, while risking everything and everyone around you. James met his eyes. Then what's your solution? Because those people are still going to be hungry tomorrow morning. The city programs still won't feed them. The shelters still won't have enough. I don't have a solution yet, Marcus admitted. But I know this one doesn't work. They sat in silence, the hum of the refrigerators the only sound. Finally, James spoke. Are you going to fire me? Marcus thought about it. The smart business decision was obvious. Cut the liability, protect the investment, move on. But he kept thinking about that photograph, James outside the shelter, hollow-eyed and desperate. And he thought about the nurse at Northwestern, the taxi driver, the men on the park bench. Real people with real hunger, depending on a chef who was willing to risk everything for them. No, Marcus said. I'm not going to fire you. James looked up, confused. Why not? Because I think you're on to something important, even if you're going about it all wrong. Marcus sat back down. But things are going to change. No more secret cooking sessions. No more hiding. No more pretending this isn't happening. I don't understand. You want to feed people who fall through the cracks? Fine. Let's figure out how to do it legally, safely, and sustainably. Marcus pulled out his laptop. But you're going to have to trust me. And more importantly, you're going to have to be willing to do this the right way, even if it's slower and harder than what you're doing now. James stared at him. You're serious. Dead serious. Because you're right, those people deserve to be fed. But they also deserve food that won't get them sick, served by people who won't lose everything for helping them. Marcus opened his laptop. So here's what's going to happen. You're going to stop the unauthorized cooking, effective immediately. And I'm going to figure out how we turn your guerrilla operation into something legal. Just like that? No, not just like that. It's going to take time, paperwork, probably lawyers. Marcus looked at James. But I'd rather spend my time building something real than watching you self-destruct trying to save the world alone. James was quiet for a long moment. Then, why are you doing this? Marcus thought about his uncle, who'd left him this restaurant with a note that said, "It's not about the money. It's about feeding people who need it." He'd never understood what that meant until now. Because someone once told me restaurants are about more than profit margins, Marcus said. And I'm starting to think he was right. Marcus spent the next morning in his hotel room, surrounded by empty coffee cups and open browser tabs. He'd been researching for 6 hours straight: food safety regulations, nonprofit structures, community kitchen licensing, liability insurance, health department permits. The deeper he dug, the more complicated it became. At noon, his phone rang. Patricia. Mark? You feeling better? James said you left early yesterday. Marcus had almost forgotten his cover story. Yeah, much better. I'll be in for the dinner shift. Actually, that's why I'm calling. I need to cut your hours this week. Budget's tight. Of course it was. Marcus was bleeding his own restaurant dry without even knowing it. Understood, he said, then hung up and went back to his research. By 3 p.m., he made a list of 7 impossible requirements to make James's operation legal. By 5 p.m., he'd found potential solutions to 3 of them. By 7 p.m., he'd scheduled appointments with a food safety lawyer and a nonprofit consultant. By 9 p.m., he was standing outside the office of Councilwoman Sarah Martinez, Chicago's 12th Ward representative. Her assistant had said she was working late. Marcus was counting on it. I don't have an appointment, Marcus said to the young man at the desk. But I need 10 minutes of the councilwoman's time. It's about food insecurity in the South Side. Those turned out to be magic words. 5 minutes later, he was sitting across from Sarah Martinez, a woman in her 50s with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. You have 8 minutes, she said. Make them count. Marcus told her everything, leaving out James's name and the illegal aspects, focusing instead on the gap in services. Night shift workers who couldn't access food banks. Shelters that ran out of meals. People who fell through every safety net the city had. This isn't news to me, Martinez said when he finished. We've known about the service gaps for years. The problem is funding. The city meal programs barely cover 50% of the need. What if there was a private solution? A restaurant willing to prepare low-cost meals for distribution, fully licensed and inspected? Martinez leaned forward. What kind of restaurant? One that's already operating, already has the infrastructure. They just need permits for early morning preparation and community meal distribution. That's not simple. Health codes, insurance, liability. I know. That's why I'm here. I need to know if it's even possible. Or if I'm wasting my time. Martinez studied him. Why do you care? Most restaurant owners want nothing to do with community feeding programs. The margins are terrible. Marcus thought about James, working alone in the darkness, trying to save people one meal at a time. Let's just say I know someone who's already doing it the wrong way. I want to help them do it right. Something in Martinez's expression shifted. There might be a path. The city has a pilot program, Community Kitchen Initiative. It allows licensed restaurants to prepare meals for nonprofit distribution, with reduced permit fees and expedited inspections. Why haven't I heard of it? Because only 2 restaurants have signed up in 3 years. The paperwork's brutal, the profit margins are non-existent, and most owners don't want the headache. She pulled out a business card and wrote a number on the back. But if you're serious, call this person. Teresa Nguyen, City Health Department. Tell her I sent you. Marcus took the card. Thank you? Don't thank me yet. Even with the program, you're looking at 6 months minimum to get fully operational. Applications, inspections, insurance reviews. And that's if everything goes perfectly, which it never does. 6 months. James couldn't wait 6 months. The people he was feeding couldn't wait 6 months. But Marcus just nodded and left. Over the next 2 days, Marcus moved like a man possessed. He called Teresa Nguyen and started the application process. He contacted 3 food safety lawyers and hired the one who didn't immediately tell him he was insane. He met with an insurance broker who specialized in nonprofit food operations. He also met with Pastor Williams. "You're really going to try this?" the pastor asked, incredulous. "I'm already trying it," Marcus corrected. "The question is whether James will go along with it. What do you need from me?" "Partnership. The restaurant can't just give food away. We need a nonprofit distributor. Your shelter is already established, already trusted in the community. If you're willing to be the official recipient and distribution point, it makes everything cleaner legally." Pastor Williams sat back in his worn office chair. "And James? He knows about this?" "Not yet. I wanted to make sure it was possible before I got his hopes up. He's going to fight you on stopping the current operation." "I know. He's stubborn. I've noticed." Pastor Williams smiled for the first time. "You're good for him, you know that? Whether he admits it or not, he needs someone to tell him he can't save everyone by himself." Marcus spent the rest of the week in meetings. The lawyer explained the liability protections they need. The insurance broker outlined coverage requirements. Teresa Nguyen walked him through health department permits for pre-dawn food preparation. It was exhausting, expensive, and bureaucratically nightmarish. But it was possible. On Friday evening, Marcus returned to the Ember and Oak and asked James to meet him in the empty dining room after closing. James arrived looking wary. "I've been doing what you said, no unauthorized cooking. But people are asking where I've been. The nurse at Northwestern, the taxi drivers." "I know. And they're going to have to wait a little longer." Marcus spread out the papers on a table: applications, permit forms, partnership agreements. "But not forever." James looked at the documents, confusion crossing his face. "What is this?" "This is how we make your operation legal. Community Kitchen Initiative, partnership with Pastor Williams's shelter, proper permits, insurance, everything." Marcus pointed to the timeline he'd created. "It'll take about 6 months to get fully operational, but we can start a scaled-down version in maybe 3 months if we rush the permits." James sat down slowly, staring at the papers like they might disappear. "You're serious?" he said finally. "Completely. But I need you to be serious too. No more secret cooking. No more taking risks that could destroy everything we're building." 3 months, James said quietly. "That's a lot of hungry people going to bed with empty stomachs." "I know. But it's better than the alternative, which is you getting caught, losing everything, and helping no one ever again." James picked up the application, reading through it carefully. Then he looked up at Marcus with something that might have been hope. "Why are you doing this?" "Really?" Marcus thought about it. "Because you reminded me that restaurants can be about more than money. And because my uncle would have wanted it this way." James extended his hand across the table. Marcus shook it. "Let's feed some people," James said. "Legally this time," Marcus added. For the first time since they'd met, James smiled, a real, genuine smile. "Legally," he agreed. 3 months later, Marcus Chen stood in the parking lot of the Ember and Oak at 4:45 a.m., watching the first hints of dawn paint the Chicago sky. His phone buzzed. A text from James, everything ready. You coming in? Marcus smiled and walked toward the back entrance. The same door where this whole thing had started, where he'd first smelled bacon frying in the darkness and discovered a chef with a secret. But today, there were no secrets. The back door was propped open, and inside, the kitchen blazed with light and activity. James stood at the griddles, but he wasn't alone anymore. 3 volunteers from Pastor Williams's shelter worked alongside him, trained and certified through the accelerated food handler program Marcus had arranged. Patricia was there too, overseeing operations with her clipboard, finally understanding what those mysterious inventory discrepancies had really meant. And on the wall, newly framed and official, hung their permits, community kitchen license, early morning food preparation authorization, nonprofit partnership agreement. It had taken every favor Marcus could call in, thousands of dollars in legal fees, and more bureaucratic headaches than he'd thought possible. But they'd done it. Morning, boss, James said, grinning. He'd stopped calling Marcus Mark after the truth came out, a revelation that had shocked Patricia but, surprisingly, hadn't cost Marcus her respect. If anything, she'd worked harder once she understood what they were building. Morning, chef. How many orders today? 45 confirmed, plus 10 extras for walk-ups. James gestured to the containers, no longer plain white, but branded with a new logo. Ember Community Kitchen, feeding Chicago's night shift. The branding had been Patricia's idea. If we're doing this, we're doing it right, she'd said. People should know who's feeding them. Marcus watched the operation flow smoothly. The food was the same, bacon, eggs, hash browns, simple but substantial, but everything else had changed. Official order forms from partner organizations. Temperature logs for health compliance. Proper insulated bags with the restaurant's name emblazoned on the side. At 5:30 a.m., the first delivery van arrived, a donated vehicle from a local business owner who'd read about the program in the Tribune. The story had run 2 weeks ago. Restaurant owner and former homeless chef partner to feed Chicago's forgotten workers. James had hated the publicity at first, uncomfortable with being labeled former homeless. But the article had brought in donations, volunteer applications, and partnership requests from other shelters. Ready to load up? One of the volunteers asked. James checked his watch. Let's do it. They loaded the containers efficiently, each one tagged with a delivery location and time. Marcus grabbed an insulated bag. Mind if I ride along? James raised an eyebrow. The owner wants to do deliveries? The owner wants to see what he's paying for. They took 2 vehicles, James in the van, Marcus following in his car. The route was familiar now: Northwestern Memorial Hospital, the taxi depot, the sanitation facility, the bus terminal. But this time, when they arrived at each stop, people were waiting with smiles instead of furtive glances. The nurse at Northwestern, a woman named Carol who Marcus had finally met properly, greeted them with genuine warmth. You're 5 minutes early, she said. I love this new system. My whole unit knows when to expect you. How many today? James asked. 8. Night shift has been brutal this week. They handed over the meals, and Carol scanned the QR code on the receipt, another new addition, allowing them to track distributions for their nonprofit reporting. At the taxi depot, the same driver Marcus had seen 3 months ago was there, but now she had company, 5 other drivers, all chipping in $1 or $2 each for their meals. Best breakfast deal in Chicago, she said, handing James a crumpled $5 bill. And it actually tastes good, not like cafeteria food. The final stop was Pastor Williams's shelter. They pulled up at 6:45 a.m., and the pastor was already outside, helping unload. 25 today, he said. We've got more people than usual. We brought 30, James replied. Just in case. Inside, Marcus saw the difference 3 months had made. The shelter's kitchen was cleaner, better organized, staffed with volunteers who'd been trained through their program. A sign on the wall read, Hot breakfast served 7 to 7:30 a.m., courtesy of Ember Community Kitchen. People lined up orderly, no longer desperate or ashamed, just hungry workers and struggling families getting a warm meal before facing their day. An older man approached James. "You're the chef, right? The one who used to bring food before all this official stuff?" James nodded cautiously. "Just wanted to say thanks. I'm one of the guys you used to meet in the park. Got a job now, dishwasher at a hotel, but I still come by when I can afford it." He pressed $2 into James's hand. "It's not much, but it's perfect," James said quietly. "Thank you." Marcus watched the exchange and felt something settle in his chest, the knowledge that they'd gotten it right. Not perfect, not without challenges, but right. By 8 a.m., all the deliveries were done. James and Marcus sat in the empty restaurant kitchen, exhausted but satisfied. 45 meals today," James said. 3 months ago, I was doing maybe 30, all under the table, always scared of getting caught. And now? Now we're doing it right. Slower, sure. More paperwork, definitely. But sustainable." James looked around the kitchen. "This can actually last." Marcus pulled out his laptop and showed James the numbers. The Community Kitchen Initiative had a modest budget, donations, small grants, the $1 or $2 people paid when they could. It didn't make money, but it didn't lose much either, especially with the tax benefits and reduced permit fees. More importantly, they'd received inquiries from 3 other Chicago restaurants interested in starting similar programs. "You started something," Marcus said. "Something bigger than just feeding people." "We started something," James corrected. "I would have crashed and burned without you." The day crews started arriving, line cooks and prep workers who now understood that their restaurant was part of something larger. Patricia appeared, looking tired but pleased. "Morning rush starts in an hour," she announced. "And we've got a party of 12 coming for brunch at 11. Life at the Ember and Oak went on, but transformed. The restaurant still served dinner to paying customers, still struggled with the same challenges every restaurant faced. But now it also served breakfast to people who needed it most, legally and proudly. Marcus's phone buzzed. A text from his business partner in San Francisco. "How's the investment looking?" He thought about the spreadsheets, the money he'd poured into legal fees and permits, the donations he'd made from his own pocket. On paper, the Ember and Oak was still barely profitable. But Marcus looked around the kitchen, at James directing prep work with quiet confidence, at Patricia managing her clipboard with renewed purpose, at the framed permits on the wall representing 3 months of impossible bureaucratic victories. He texted back, "Best investment I ever made." As morning light filled the kitchen, Marcus Chin realized he'd come to Chicago looking for numbers that made sense. Instead, he'd found something that mattered more, a restaurant with a purpose, a chef with a mission, and proof that doing the right thing didn't have to mean doing it alone. The bacon sizzled on the griddle, but this time, everyone knew it was there. And that made all the difference.